Welcome to the Records and Information Management Week. I appreciate everyone being here. Everyone has a records and information management responsibility here at DOT. We have a number of resources for you to locate it on our web page on the .NET under Work Tools, so please check that out. All agencies face common IT challenges, from stovepipe systems and duplicated services to new investments without solid information management plans. We are happy to inform everyone here that as an information manager, you can make a difference. Today, Jared Spiegel will be talking about the importance of information management in agency IT challenges, the role of OMB and the recommended methodologies for transformation planning, and the importance of information managers in today's transformation initiatives. Now, a little bit about Jared. He has extensive experience in both the private and public sectors, including management consulting, entrepreneurship, and executive business management. He's the CEO of Phase 1 Consulting Group, a firm that focuses on a full lifecycle services in the federal sector, and is a 2012 Fed 100 award winner. He also serves on the executive board at the TCU Neely School of Business, where he graduated with a Bachelor of Business Administration in Finance and later received a Master's of Business Administration. Jared?
Thank you. All right, good morning. Can everybody hear me? I probably don't even need the microphone. Thanks for having me here today. Ron and I have known each other for a little while, but our paths crossed at a DHS event a few months back. And DHS was sponsoring a DHS-only information managers type of conference. And the topic was very similar to this one, which is, you know, in today's transformation planning environment and all the change that OMB is trying to drive, and the new digital office over at OMB and these types of things, what's the role of information management? And the hypothesis that I generally kind of espouse is that the role of information management is increasing in importance and is increasingly the critical element to whether or not these transformation plans are going to work or not going to work. I think we went through, probably 6 or 7 years ago, we were going through a period of very, very heavy planning. You had architects and planners putting together hundreds and hundreds of pages of plans that kind of hit the shelves and didn't come to fruition. And we almost had the opposite effect, where the pendulum swung completely the other direction. And we had this free-for-all of building things quickly without much thought as to what the plans would be and what it is that we're actually trying to achieve and how to deal with the information that's actually part of these initiatives. And I see now over the last couple of years that we're hitting a balance in these transformation initiatives, where we do have agile implementation work that's going on. We have people trying to do things in a just-in-time type of way of implementations, but there's an appropriate level of planning that's going on, an appropriate level, hopefully, of information management participation. So we'll just talk a little bit about that. If anyone has any questions throughout, you can shoot your hand up, and I'm happy to take questions throughout the presentation. Okay. About a year ago or so, there was a very, very small group of cabinet CIOs that got together with some of the OMB crowd. And what they did, and I facilitated a discussion. There were about 7 or 8 cabinet CIOs and some of the OMB folks. And there was a small conversation around what are the main common challenges that we're seeing across the entire federal IT landscape. And that conversation went on for a couple of hours, and it was kind of a little small room, and it was a very there wasn't a lot of decorum to the conversation. It was really just a free sharing of information. This was really the synthesis of what came out of that exchange, and I thought it was really appropriate for the conversation that we're having today. What people were consistently talking about in terms of the common IT challenges were the fact, first and foremost, that there are these shadow IT organizations that are really servicing the needs of a lot of our missions. When you think about the organizations that you service, the CIO shop is doing a certain level of mission automation and delivering applications, but then you have these applications that kind of pop out of the missions. Maybe it's out of a field office in Chicago, or maybe it's out of a group that's over here. And in those applications, we have information privacy concerns, we have all kinds of information security types of challenges. Increasingly, a lot of those mission applications that are out there, although they're getting the job done, they may have PII implications to what we're dealing with. So as these things sprout up, the CIOs are concerned about information security. They're concerned about whether or not this adheres to our guiding principles of how we want to deliver things. But I think from an information management standpoint, there's the equal concern of, is that storing things that it shouldn't store, or sharing things in ways that they shouldn't share. They're very, very sensitive applications that I know that I've personally seen that pop up and have tons of citizen PII information that then have to be secured because they didn't go through a planning process. The second thing that I think is a real interesting phenomenon these days is that the commodity IT service providers out there, the Salesforce platform as a service people, or the Oracle folks, or whoever it is out there selling commodity IT, is selling directly to mission customers. So we in the CIO hallways that are dealing with how do we plan and how we drive transformation, the concern in the room was that we need to be selling to our mission customers the services that we have. How can we as information managers or architects work with you, mission person, to help solve your problems? Because the very next hour, it might be an Oracle person or another commodity IT service person selling to that mission customer. So we have mission applications being hosted in Amazon, never going through a CIO's hallway, never having CIO conversations. This is part of the first and second bullet really come together. The third concern that was in the room was that a lot of missions just flat out are not leveraging IT the way that they should be to maximize their automation component. There's still a lot of transformation to be done, I think, is the common messaging that's there. What I thought was interesting in the room is that the folks that were in the room, the CIOs in the room, were largely blaming themselves for this. We need to be out more. We need to be working with the missions more. We need to get out from the headquarters desk, get out and see how we can service these missions in a more appropriate type of way. The fourth was that mission personnel really don't engage their OCIOs. And there was a common kind of thought pattern in the room of, well, how do we want them to come and engage us? If I'm a rail safety person, who do I talk to in the OCIO? If I'm a wildland fire person in Boise, who at Department of the Interior do I talk to in the OCIO if I need a new fire tracking system or new rail safety information system? Who are my people that service me and help me within that OCIO environment? There was a lot of active dialogue with the CIOs in the room talking about that. The fourth was that goes with the third, but there was no single point of contact for them. Is it the information managers that are the outreach point to the missions? Who's reaching out to the missions in a customer relationship type of way? We talked a lot about the automotive industry. And if you guys remember, not too long ago, you'd drive your car to get it serviced, and you talk to the mechanic, and the mechanic, comes out, and you don't know what he's saying, and he doesn't know what you're saying, and now you drive in and you talk to the head of the red team, and they have a little polo shirt on and they're nice, and they wash your car, and it's a completely different customer experience, right? Who's that head of the red team, for us? Is it the information management community? Is it the architecture community? Is it us working together to go out to these missions and service their needs so that they're not dealing directly with the mechanic, so to speak? And then the last couple of points that I thought were very appropriate is those CIOs were in this kind of somewhat heated discussion around what are our common challenges and what are the mega themes that are really kind of holding us back from modern IT. They talked about information not being known. And I think that you can see how these interweave together. The fact that there are information assets that are in the organization that people don't know how to get access to, don't know how to use, don't know how to share. This was a mega theme that they all nodded their heads on and said, yes, that's a problem. We need to be able to fix that. What are the information assets that we have? How do we expose them? How do we share them in the organization? And then lastly, the new information systems that are out, not having solid information standards and requirements built into these solicitations that are going out. When you build that wildland fire tracking system or you build that rail safety system, what are the information requirements, the information standards that are there? The reason I put this up and kind of talk through it is I think that what this tells me and what it told me kind of leaving that room was that there's still a lot of transformation work to be done. There's still a lot of energy that needs to be put into bringing modern IT into these mission functions and bringing it into how we do business within the missions of DOT or Interior or USDA, or virtually every single agency has a massive amount of technical automation that needs to be introduced into these mission functions. Over the last 10 years, we've done data center consolidation initiatives from OMB, we've done eGov initiatives, we've done initiatives after initiatives after initiatives, and yet I would still contend, I think probably everyone in the room would contend that if you look at the next 10 years, there will be a massive amount of application modernization work that has to be done in these agencies to really bring modern IT to the forefront, which really lends itself to then how does that get planned appropriately, which is part of the theme for today. This is the obligatory GAO slide, right? So GAO comes out and they talk about all of our planning deficiencies very consistently. It's almost like a comet coming around every 12 or 18 months. You know, here's the GAO audit that says that we do a terrible job planning. And what they talk about is they talk about deficiencies in planning, oversight, agencies working together, you know. Are we building that rail safety information system? Are we building a safety information system that services all the modes? Those types of questions. How do we measure performance? These types of things. I bounced this slide against Randy Height, who used to be the head of the IT audit function over at GAO. And I said, Randy, how long has this existed? And Randy said, it's existed for as long as I can remember. So these types of challenges it's not just an executive branch type of challenge, it's not just a megatrend type of challenge, but there is a constant pressure on us as IT professionals to do a better job with planning and meeting mission needs. GAO recognizes it. They put it in print so often that I think we've become a little bit numb to this construct. So the question then is, how do we rise to the challenge as an IT community? Is it the CPIC people? Is it the architects? Is it the records management or information management professionals? Does it fall to the CIO because it's not anybody else's job, and so it's got to be the CIO who's the kind of the chief evangelist that's out there? I mean, I think we as a community of 14s and 15s that are leading these organizations have to answer these questions of how do we come together in order to plan for this innovation that needs to take place. Any questions on that? All right, everybody's still awake. That's good. So OMB, and I work a lot with OMB on some of the planning methodologies and some of the things that they're trying to do there. And OMB has long espoused the architect, invest, implement type of mantra. You know, we have to plan, and then we have to invest, and then we have to implement. This was really, really driving a lot of the heavy-handed planning that was happening 7 or 8 years ago. I think 4 or 5 years ago, we threw the baby out with the bathwater and just started building. There was no plan, there was no architect, there was really no invest, there was just a lot of implementation stuff that was happening. A couple of years back, OMB put together a group of agencies, 14 different agencies from around government. DoD played an active role, Interior, HHS, the Intel community, all these types of groups. And I chaired for about 6 months a collection of leadership from these agencies to rethink this type of construct, right? Why is it that planning happens within certain parts of the OCIO and then other parts of the OCIO have different types of plans? One person came to the table and they said, you know, in my agency, every single office has its own methodology for how to do planning. The CPIC folks have a method, the information managers have a methodology for planning, the cyber guys have a methodology for planning, the architects have a methodology for planning. To get anything done, we have to have 4 or 5 plans, all of which hit the desk of the CIO, who somehow has to magically kind of stitch it all together. And we can't operate with any degree of agility. And as a result, we just stopped planning because it's too cumbersome and we just built stuff. And this was an agency who was talking about their own experiences. The thought pattern on OMB's side was not to throw out architect, invest, implement, but the thought pattern was to get agencies to come together and say, here's how we would like to do an architect, invest, implement methodology that includes all of these different kind of planning capacities. The integration of CPIC and EA and information management and cyber and infrastructure planning, the integration of all of these planning functions was the goal of the agencies around the table. How do we work together towards a common intent? Over at Homeland Security, the Undersecretary of Management over Homeland Security just about 6 months ago put out a memo that's public, and he was talking about unity of effort and imploring the organization and the planners in that organization and the governance people and the managers, not just in the IT side, but in human capital and physical assets and different sides of the organization, to work together towards what he called unity of effort, right? When we show up to work every single day within an OCIO, do we know what the top 4 mission challenges are? And as information managers, architects, capital planners, cyber people, are we working with a unity of effort towards solving those 4 things? I like to think about, in any organization, those mission challenges being tattooed on my arm. Is it rail safety at DOT, right? Is it wildland fire at Interior? Is it law enforcement at National Park Service? You know, what are the major mega challenges that we all together show up to work every single day to solve? It's not serving the citizen. It's not serving the missions of DOT or DOI or USDA. It's more narrow than that. These are the challenges in this 6-month or this 1-year period. So how are we working together towards that end? And what methodologically are we doing towards that end? What the folks in the room, as they were reflecting on Architect, Invest, Implement, what the folks in the room were thinking about was what types of adjustments need to be made into this type of cycle. There used to be a methodology called the Federal Segment Architecture methodology. And it was very interesting dialogue. What do we do with the FSAM? Some of you guys are maybe exposed to the FSAM and maybe not, but the Federal Segment Architecture methodology, what do we do with it? The very first thing that we did as an exercise was we dissected the name. Everyone hated federal. Every agency said, wait a minute, we're not just in our own kind of federal cocoon, right? We work with other nations, we work with state and local and tribal in some instances. Federal is a bit kind of geocentric, right? We're the center of the universe, we're federal. So they said, we gotta get rid of federal. And then segment, and they looked at segment. They're like, what is a segment? What is that? You know, are we solving a common problem or are we not solving a common problem? Every time that we talk about FSAM, we have to then go through a long conversation about what is a segment. Well, really, we're just solving a problem. Could be a solution problem. Could be an enterprise global standards problem. It's a problem. So they said, let's get rid of segment. And then architecture, and that was the one that like really got people started. You know, everybody hates the word architecture. So they said, we got to get rid of the word architecture. No one knows what it means. It's too confusing, and we're tired of trying to explain it. And oh, by the way, again, very geocentric sounding. Is this about the architects, the chief architects there? I work with a lot of chief architects, the chief architects there. So this is your methodology, this is your show, right? Well, that's not really appropriate. If the architect working with the capital planner and the investment, or the information security planners, infrastructure planners, the information management planners, all these planners coming together, it's not the architect's show. The architect's just one of the planners. The people in the room, you know, violently agreeing that let's redefine, you know, this construct and get out of this very narrow view of this is the architect's methodology, right? To be then kind of compounded with everyone else's methodologies. And so what they were really interested in doing was trying to build in a collaborative methodology so that we could all work together. And OMB vehemently nodding their head saying, yes, let's do this. Let's not only bring these information managers together, let's bring the DoD and civilian worlds together too. What do they do that's good that we should learn from on the civilian side, and what do we do that's good that they should learn from on the other side? To be completely candid, the initiative was chaired by a representative from OMB, myself, and then a representative from GAO. And I thought the whole kind of DoD civilian blending was going to be a big challenge, to say the least. What I found was that there was a lot of mutual respect. The types of things from information management and from a planning standpoint that DoD was doing had a tremendous amount of rigor that we could learn from. A lot of the change management and transformation planning and culture change types of things that we had been doing on the federal civilian side, they came into the room and said, well, we can learn from that. So the arms were crossed in the beginning, and finally we kind of worked into a collaborative environment. But I think what was interesting for the discussion today is that through Architect, Invest, Implement, people were realizing that we have to bring in the information management construct early in the process as we're thinking about what challenge are we trying to solve. So let's take a law enforcement challenge. There was an agency in town that had a lot of police fatalities happening within their police force. And their challenge was, and the challenge to the planning organization was, we need to find what's going on with this and have this not happen. You know, fewer, if not zero, police fatalities happening in that organization. Well, they kind of went through and they did a bunch of planning and they thought about this stuff, and it came down to radio interoperability and access to case files and these types of things that you'd expect. They're pulling people over, they don't know that's a bad guy. The bad guy, you know, it does bad things. And so how do we have radio interoperability? How do we get them access to case files that show what they're doing? How do we get faster lookups of license plate? I mean, it was all that type of thing. Information management, information management, information management, right? They worked that issue from a technical standpoint and a radio and infrastructure standpoint. Information management came in really deep into the process, you know, with the privacy issues. How do we share appropriately? How do we share in a secure way? The cyber guys kind of drifted in, you know, 4 months into the initiative. The information managers kind of drifted in 4 months into the initiative. And not to their fault, but that there wasn't a culture in that organization where these people came to the table from the start in order to do this type of planning. And so a good case example of how those folks around the table in the beginning would have driven a more effective, more collaborative, more cohesive plan to the CIO, to the head of law enforcement of that organization saying, boss, here's the plan. We sign off. The cyber guys are on board, information managers are on board, technical folks are on board, mission planners are on board. This is the plan. And so when you think about those unity of effort types of initiatives, whether it's safety at transportation or wildland fire at interior or invasive species over at USDA or these sorts of things, when you think about those types of unity of effort types of challenges, how often do we find that we're putting in front of the leadership these unified collaborative plans where we say we're all signed off, everybody's on board, right? Yes?
I decided to make this interactive.
Oh, good. I was hoping for an amen, but.
So this is a true story, lots and lots of years ago. Relates to the police story and data management. There are several states where the license plate stays with the car, not with the person. In this particular case, there was a man driving to his brother's funeral, overcome by grief, pulls over to the side of the road, and he's just sitting there, leaned over the steering wheel. So the police car pulls behind him, looks up the license plate number. It shows this is a stolen car. So he thinks he's dealing with a criminal. He walks up, the man reaches into his pocket to get his ID. Policeman thinks he's going for a gun and unfortunately shoots and kills him. And very tragic story, but when people thought of the information management part of their database, they didn't think to include, when the car gets sold, something happens to it. If it was reported stolen, we need to erase that. So the driver isn't treated as a criminal.
It's a great case example. There are many, many examples where these agencies that we do business with touch citizens directly in direct ways, whether it's safety inspections of transportation or firefighting or law enforcement or women and infant children programs. There are all these types of programs that are touching citizens in ways that are intended to help society, help business, help individuals, and these sorts of things. But when we're interacting, things can go well or things can go poorly. And on top of that type of construct, if the initiative was put forward to try to fix that, right? We need an environment where this information is more easily accessible, it's shared in appropriate ways with the appropriate levels of security and these types of things. How long would it take us to fix that problem, right? How long would it take us to come up with a plan that can run the wickets to fix that problem? The speed of idea to delivery is elongated for a variety of reasons. When you look at that kind of thread, it's elongated because we do a really bad, slow job on maybe getting procurements out the door or managing the delivery of vendors who are building these systems or those sorts of things. But I would also take a little bit of pain up front that in the planning function, how well are we able to come together to plan that problem? Because that's a multifaceted problem. How much will it cost? What's the security ramifications of what we're saying? How do we share that information? What's appropriate? And so forth and so on. So not something just the information managers can solve, not something just the architects can solve. And I think that that's an interesting revelation here as we talk about OCIOs and how they function. Okay, not the prettiest visual, but this is basically what we're going to end up talking about. So the consensus in the room with the people that were then working on what do we do with the federal segment architecture methodology, and what do we as agencies, and the 14 different agencies are on the table, what do we want to do to try to drive this community forward? It was mainly chief architects that have been brought into the room to try to have this dialogue of how do we take this methodology forward, how do we get rid of this architecture only type of construct and that sort of thing. And I think it was a watershed moment when we started just listing off the different types of planners that had to be, the different opinions that needed to weigh in order to come up with a plan of action to solve the law enforcement challenge or whatever the challenge might be. And we just started rattling off, here's some of those types of folks. You get the enterprise architects in the room, the chief architects in the room, right? A lot of times the chief architects will work with maybe the investment planners, the capital planner types of folks. That relationship kind of works. In some cases it's the same person, so that's okay. But how often do those architects and capital planners work with the HR organizational planners, the people working on the training side? Almost never. There's a training issue to solving that law enforcement challenge, right? The strategic planners, how often do those folks come into the room? The records planners, information management planners are virtually never in the room until later on in the process when someone says, oh yeah, what's the implication to that? The privacy folks and the cybersecurity folks almost never come in the room up front. And so as they were listing all these types of things out, I thought it was actually this watershed moment where they had this self-reflection saying, we can no longer as architects be the center of the universe when it comes to planning, that we need to do this together and work this collaboratively. So when you look at, there's a document that OMB put out called the Common Approach to Enterprise Architecture, and in that document, they speak about this concept pretty actively. It was a document written for architects to be delivered to architects so that they could pick it up and read it. And clearly in there it says, we are but one of many planning functions. And unfortunately it's written for architects to architects, but I encourage anybody to pick it up and take a look at it and look in the methodology section where we talk about the methodology that's in here. It came out probably about a year or so ago under Steve Van Rokel's signature. And it clearly is in there saying, we're but one of many planning functions. We have to work with these other groups if we're ever going to get anything done. And I think that that's a powerful statement to the role of information managers and architects and all these people working together. Collaboration was the key. Collaboration was the word over and over and over again. How do we collaborate? How do we collaborate? So naturally, the methodology was reborn. So there's something called the federal segment architecture methodology that was retired. Too federal, too segment specific, too architecture mumbo jumbo type of language. How do we get something in place where we can reach out to our federal, state, and local partners? The D&I folks were in the room, people from PMISC, the Information Sharing Environment, or Shaminder Paul's shop and those folks. And some of those types of representation were in the room. And they were clearly saying, look, every day our mission is not talking to other federal folks. Our mission is state, local, international. The stolen car coming across the border is a suspicious activity reporting issue. That is a Canada, US, state, local sharing. How do we get that suspicious activity report and spread that type of issue? So those folks were in the room. People from HHS, same thing. They're dealing with hospitals. They're dealing with governments. They're dealing with commercial institutes, these types of things. And so FSAM was retired and rebuilt as the collaborative planning methodology. In this methodology now, all the federal language is stripped out, federal specific language. When we talk about Exhibit 300s, we talk about this, that, and the other, we talk about them in more general terms so that people from other organizations, state, local, tribal, can pick these things up and say, okay, I know what this means in my world, and I can kind of do that translation. All the architecture language is really stripped out. We talk about technology planning. We talk about information planning. We talk about investment planning and those sorts of things. And really, it's meant to be a methodology. It's published by OMB. It's in that the Common Approach to Enterprise Architecture document that I was talking about, and it's hosted at a .org instead of being originally it was on the OMB Max website. Now it's on a .org called planthefuture.org. And it's meant to be something that can be used industry-wide, open source, and get us out of a couple of different ruts. The first rut we've talked very actively about, which is silos of planners. The second rut is what we get ourselves into in a vendor community. You know, a vendor community, the contractors will come in and they'll say, well, this is a proprietary methodology. We can use it and we can talk to you, Ron, about it, but those other vendors from other companies can't be in the room. We went through an initiative over at OMB not too long ago. Every agency went through this initiative where every single person had to sign their life away just to participate in the mandated initiative. I won't name it by name, but people probably remember that. I remember signing away, that non-disclosure so that I can follow a mandated initiative requirement that was coming out of the planning functions. And so we can't have that as government. And this was part of the topic in the room as well. Why do we need a methodology unto ourselves? It's so that we don't have to absorb vendor-specific proprietary methodologies ourselves, right? So that when we work on the law enforcement challenge, that we can have vendor X, vendor Y, and vendor Z in the room, that each are paired in with the 3 or 4 different law enforcement organizations who are supporting people in different ways, and we can, from day one, say, this is the way that we're going to plan. You may have a information management methodology, and you may have a capital planning methodology, and you may have an architecture methodology, and each one may be proprietary to your company, and that's great. But when it comes to working together to solve a challenge, this is the way that we as a government are going to do it. We can train our staff on this methodology. We can put this methodology into our procurements. It's a methodology that's by the agencies to be used on behalf of all the different teams that have to come together. It was an interesting discussion, frankly, where information managers and the architects and the people that were in the room kind of making these decisions, it was one of these kind of inside baseball observations where they were realizing that sometimes we're just held back because people, because of proprietary methods and ways of doing things, can't work together. And so we've got to break down that barrier by having something that's open, that people can just share. And I thought that was very interesting. A couple of points on the CPM, and I encourage people to go and just download it because you can download it. But the couple of points on the CPM, the heavy-duty planning aspects of this that come in really step 3. You see the steps 1 through 5 across the top. The planning steps are really 1 through 3. And then it decomposes into a bunch of activities that you see kind of down below. And those activities decompose into tasks even further below that. That's a big, unruly visual. It's meant to be a guide, not a prescriptive, thou shalt run through every single wicket type of thing. You look at this as an organization, and DHS has here recently done this, where they've taken this and they've said, okay, these are the pieces of this that we think are appropriate for the planning within our organization. And they've customized this to DHS's, and DHS has its own flavor of this right now. We saw the same type of effect with FSAM. The RSAM at HHS materialized, the DSAM at DHS materialized, and now with the CPM, we're seeing the same type of effect, where people, information managers, architects, these sorts of folks are coming around the table saying, okay, how do we want to then use this asset in our organization, tailor that to our organization? But I think what's really interesting is that in step 1 was something that the civilian side seemed to be doing really much better than the defense side. The defense guys really liked what they were hearing on step 1, which is a rigorous and thoughtful approach with architects and information managers and then mission executives to really identify and validate the problem that we're trying to solve. It sounds very basic, but we have these planning initiatives that get 6 or 8 months down the road, and we come back and the executive says, well, this isn't what I want, right? You're not solving the challenge that I want, right? You may be solving the challenge of that license plate issue, but you're missing the context of the larger set of issues that I'm actually trying to get done. There's a whole kind of series of steps to ensure that there's appropriate sponsorship, appropriate mission buy-in, that we hear from the executive staff in a written way, this is the challenge that I want to solve. And then we at an operational management and planning level get together and say, this is what we thought we heard. And then go back to that executive staff saying, this is the challenge that we think we heard, this is the way that we think we're going to go about solving that. The DoD guys love this construct. There was so much kind of command and do this is the order, go and plan this thing, go and plan it, coming back, well, that's not the right thing that I asked you to solve. The old adage of, bring me a rock and you bring the rock and that's not the right rock. I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about. The reason why everybody knows what that is because this happens all the time, right? And so a very methodological way in step 1 of getting the information managers, getting the architects, getting the mission executives in the room, going through in an overt and methodological way to figure out this is what it is that we're trying to solve. This is our interpretation of what it is that you want, and then getting some type of sign-off and buy-in and governance established in order to get that done. Then in step 2, and I'll only go through steps 1 through 3 here, but in step 2, there was a heavy focus in on research and leverage. What does that mean? Well, the research and leverage part was about trying as a community to reach out to peer communities to find out who else has solved these types of challenges. The the leverage reuse construct has been something kind of in our lexicon over the last 10 years or so, right? Everyone's reuse, reuse, reuse. Well, that's not the same as what that is and that sort of thing. And a lot of it's at that technical layer. Reuse that technical component over there, right? And we have things like pay.gov that actually work pretty well, and you have some other things that just are not as much reusable. This is about researching and leveraging experiences. As an information management community, as we're hearing that we're trying to solve a law enforcement challenge, perhaps at DOJ with license plates, has the National Park Service solved that challenge as well? We have things like the FRON, right, where information managers get together. Well, what's the point right? The point is share practices, but I think it's also to share experiences. Now I know that person over the National Park Service I can call and say, have you guys worked on this license plate challenge, right? Because we're trying to solve that same type of challenge. We go through and talk methodologically in step 2 about doing that. Having the information managers as part of step 1, with the architects, with the mission people, hearing that we're trying to solve the license plate challenge, enables the information managers to reach out to their peer communities across government, in industry, state and local peer communities, in order to say who else has solved this problem. Or maybe not solved this problem, who tried and failed wildly, so we know not to do that, right? And so the learning from each other construct came into play pretty heavily with step 2. Not leveraging technology components as much as establishing very active peer networks of these planning functions so that we can then reach into our peer communities and learn those lessons before we have to learn them the hard way ourselves and accelerate the way that we're doing things. And in some instances, and we treat this methodologically in here as well, in some instances just joining forces. Oh yeah, we're doing the license plate thing too, you know? And we're thinking about that at the exact same time. Maybe we should do that together. DHS did this with their e-learning capability. You know, 3 or 4 different components come together and suddenly everyone realizes they're trying to solve the same type of challenge, and how do we do that together, right? So I think that's where a lot of good methodological content of how do we reach out to industry, and how do we reach out, not just to industry meaning vendors, but the toll tag folks that run the toll tag, you know, situations all around the country. You know, they've solved license plate, right, in terms of imaging. You know, that's an industry that can help us solve the license plate construct in terms of who's that person in that car, right? And so forth and so on. And then in step 3, we get into the heavy planning function. And what you'll see now, instead of just layers and layers of architecture language, right? Whereas methodologies in the past were very much, what's your current architecture, what's your target architecture, how do we get from here to there type of thing, right? This is actually talking about the planning function of information planning, investment planning. What are and we ask questions throughout the methodology. What are the information privacy ramifications of the decision we just made? What are the cyber and information security challenges that are going to go with this particular architecture? So throughout step 3 in particular, you see lots of points where it says, stop, think about this from a cyber perspective now. Not just this is our target technical architecture for how the boxes are going to piece together, but what are the cyber ramifications to that drawing? Or what are the ramifications of the information sitting in those boxes? And that's a big change from where I think we've been in the past with the architects doing their methods for their method's sake. Any questions on that? So the methodology, if you go to the website, you'll see the methodology. You can download it. The methodology, and I put this slide in just to kind of give some examples of what it really kind of is. There's a series of documents that exist, one for each step. And in each document, there's a description of this step. Here's what we're doing in step 1. A lot of the language that I just said is written there. Here's what we're doing in step 1. Here's the purpose of step 1. I think we even go as far as saying, here's why you don't want to skip step 1, right? An at-a-glance view. Here's who needs to be involved. Here are the different types of planners that need to be involved. Here are the different types of executive decision makers that need to be involved. How they're going to be involved and what decisions they're going to make. We also talk about an activity and task level. You know, some people say, oh yeah, I got it. You know, I'm going to work with the mission people. All I need is that visual from the previous one. We were getting questions from people saying, well, what exactly do you do in that box? And so the task level definitions were put in just to help folks when they wanted to be able to see that. And then communication considerations. Every single document with the CPM has active communication considerations. Communicate this within the information management community. Communicate this to the marketing or the public, you know, relation types of folks. Communicate this to the rest of the planning community or the business and mission communities and those sorts of things. And so when you download these documents, you can look at them online, you can download these documents. When you download these documents, you can look at them and you can see places where the information managers, the cyber folks, the capital planners and things come together around these types of methods, who should be involved, when they should be involved, again, as a collection of recommendations from the 14 agencies that put this together. And my recommendation to folks that are looking at this is to look at it not as, well, this won't work in my organization, but how do I take this as a reference guide and then make this something that will be useful in my organization? And that's really the intent of what it's doing. It's not prescriptive, it's descriptive.
To that point, I was Okay. Oh, there are. Okay, great. I was gonna say I'm pretty loud. I think I did that. But so to that point, if your agency already has a toolkit similar to this, a set of documentation for planning that takes you from start to finish, that is either in use or somewhat in use by certain groups, or they have a set of documentation that they've already set as their standard for their project management lifecycle, or from their IT shop has this in place. Are you, from looking at the CPM toolkit, are you saying that the best option would be, if you're not willing to make a complete, because changing over to a new method or even just using new documents can be a transformation in itself,
Sure.
right?
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
are you saying the best method might be to pull from these documents and include some of the attributes in this toolkit in your existing documentation, or is it better to just switch completely over to the CPM toolkit?
That's a great question, and frankly should be in the slide deck now that I think about it. Because it is like the $1 million question there, right? Which is, how do you then take something like this and how do you adopt it? And what does that even mean? The dialogue around the different agencies around the table were that they were trying to put this together as what I would call a method of methods, meaning kind of the framework, if you will. So now if you look at something like a end-to-end PPM, like a project and performance management type of life cycle, right? You have a planning stage, an investment stage, and an implementation stage, that type of thing. So a lot of this, at least in steps 1 through 3, is geared towards the planning stage of things. And so you can look at that PPM, and you can look inside that planning stage, and you can say, okay, well then how do we do things in that planning stage? And that's when this can be somewhat adopted, right? So it wouldn't replace a PPM by any stretch. And by the way, steps 4 and 5 are really guidance documents. As planners, we play a role. I should have said that. We play a role, but we're not. So the 4 and 5 aren't methodological as much as it's saying, what is our role as planners in the invest, execute, perform, and measure phases of the project. But back to the question. This was developed out and the language that was being used in the room was a method of methods, meaning that as we then get in and we ask that question in step 3, we say, okay, now what are the cyber ramifications of this? That then drops into an entire set of methods that the cyber folks bring in. So the reason I think that we have architects have their methodologies and cyber people have their methodology isn't because everyone's just redundantly doing the same things. There are completely different types of things that are trying to be done, but they just need to be done in an orchestrated type of manner. And so you have a PPM, or a whole project lifecycle type of construct. In the planning phase, you drill into this, right? As you're planning maybe the solution architecture side of this, you get to the question around what are the cyber ramifications of this? And then you're drilling down into cyber-specific methodology. And so if you took this kind of multi-layered view of this, you really have kind of a multi-layered view of these methodologies actually working together. So you don't get rid of the cyber methods or the project methods and these types of things. They hinge into kind of the method of methods, if you will. And so I could see guidance around the entire guidance of how to do cyber planning is not replicated in this methodology. As you get down into step 3, the question will be posed as to what are the information security requirements around this, and then that's when you'd pick up with the other types of components. And that's what we were seeing. I'll give another kind of case example. So I was in an agency, and the mission folks had worked with the architects. They were very, very excited about the fact that they'd come up with this great plan to bring technology to bear in that mission function. So excited that here's the round table of folks, the CIO and all the CIO hallway kind of administrative, the office leads and those sorts of things, the mission executives, everybody's in the room. It's not the architect briefing out on what the plan is. The mission leader is up there saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, it's going to be great. We never thought we'd be able to get consensus on this. We've got a plan to implement technologies in our world. And the cyber person raised his hand and said, you never talk to me. I've got my own kind of set of wickets that you have to run through, and appropriately so, right? We've got to make sure that we're not doing something that's going to be dangerous from a cybersecurity standpoint. And I remember the mission person kind of being a little bit flustered, but being, trying to be a team player, saying, no problem, let's get together on that. How long do you think that'll take? Because we're really anxious to roll out. And the cyber guy said, it'll take 6 months. And I could just see the defeat, and I could feel some embarrassment for the fact that here's the planning person from the CIO shop who'd been guiding this person through these wickets, and yet the person in the office next door was not engaged and had a separate set of wickets that should have been run in parallel, but now are going to be done sequentially and take a 6-month effort, turn it into a 12-month planning effort, right? So I think a big part of this is how do we sequence our worlds together methodologically so that we can do things in parallel and actually avoid mistakes. That cyber set of wickets in that particular example, the planning that goes along with that may very well have to then drive change with decisions that have already been made because decisions have been made that were not appropriate. And so this round and round analysis paralysis tends to happen, right? Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Quite often when you bring a new process into an agency, you get a lot of resistance because, okay, I've done this one and this is the 42nd process I've had to implement in the last 6 months. Is this really a brand new process, or is this just and I think actually it may sound like I'm asking it backwards, or is this really just an intelligent way of sequencing all the things we've already done so that we can be more efficient?
Yeah, it's the latter. I mean, this is not a let's throw out cybersecurity planning. We don't need that anymore. Let's throw out project planning. We don't need that anymore. If anything, I think we learned that lesson as a federal community. 8 years ago, heavy bureaucratic planning going on all around town. 4 years ago, no planning. I was sitting in rooms where people were being chastised for putting together plans. I sat in a room where an implementation was going on and the person was told, you don't need a project manager for that implementation, right? That's the opposite end of the spectrum of sanity, right? And so I think that what this is saying, okay, we don't need the heavy-handed 12 months of architecture-only planning, right? We have to be more nimble, more agile to react to the world than that. But what we do need, and a big part of agility, is taking the best of these worlds, the best of the cyber planning, the most appropriate levels of architecture planning, and what we need is we need to be able to stitch those together, run them in parallel. And that's how we can take 18-month things, turn them into 4-month things. Not as much that we need to stop doing planning. I think we went through that for a minute. If you guys read the, with the advent of agile development came the thought pattern that agile means no planning. Well, the guys and gals that put together the Agile Manifesto, if you go Google Agile Manifesto, it was the people that put together Agile and said, these are the core tenets of Agile. These are the core things that we as a development community believe in, and it's a manifesto, and it's about this long. Not in pages, it's literally like 500 words long. And in that Agile Manifesto, the authors that are there, but in that manifesto and in some of the follow-on conversations, they said, we're not against planning. If anything, we're for planning, but what we don't want to do is planning that never turns into anything else. And I think that that's kind of the core construct we're talking about here. Good question. Okay, so a couple of final points here. A lot of the dialogue in the room was also about facilitating change. When we think about ourselves in an OCIO and a planning capacity, when we think about information managers and architects and people working together to try to solve these types of challenges, we tend to still bring our own domain expertise into play. We have an information management perspective, we have an architect's perspective, we have an investment manager perspective. But I think it's incumbent upon us to drive the cultural change perspective that's there. Every single one of our initiatives should have some kind of change management and cultural ramification of this. It's not simply about how do we share that license plate information and how do we make the technical boxes talk to one another and those sorts of things. It's how do we build a culture of sharing in these organizations. I think increasingly as we have agencies that want to interact with other agencies, mission functions like the wildland fire function needs to be able to tell the people that are recreating at Yosemite that there's a fire. People need to share and talk and share information amongst one another. And the government needs to be able to do that in order to service citizens where missions touch one another. And the culture of sharing, I think, is on the information management community. The culture of sharing is not going to come out of the infrastructure folks. It's not going to come out of the investment management folks. It may not come out of the architects, but the information managers are the ones that can facilitate that culture of sharing. Not just documenting what we have and where is it, but facilitating a cultural change towards sharing. Things like data.gov, for instance, can be taken to the next level with culture of sharing. I think fiscal responsibility is another big key. Who is in charge of making sure that ultimately what we're designing and planning is going to save money better, faster, cheaper? And I think that's on all of us together. And the information sharing is a big component of fiscal responsibility. The less we have in redundancies, the less costs. The service focus is another big capability. Many agencies right now are implementing customer relationship managers, customer representatives from the OCIO. When I talked about those key points that the CIOs around the roundtable had dialogued about, one of the big key points was around who do my mission customers go to talk to? I talked to one CIO not too long ago, and he said, Jared, I need a funnel. I need all my needs coming into one place so that I can then prioritize and service those needs. It's a customer relationship function. I liken it to going to McDonald's and just having no one at the cash register and just shouting to the cooks of the food that you want. You need someone there to interact with. And I think that the service focus of that, absent from your organization having a customer relationship management from OCIO to the mission functions, we have to simulate that within our planning process and something to consider. And then the innovation word, which I don't think has fully jumped the shark yet. I think that the innovation side of this is key, right? When we engage those mission customers, what they're looking for is not how do I hire 100 more people or how do I go and just have this big bureaucratic type of implementation, but how can I do things better, faster, cheaper? We did an implementation not too long ago in a platform as a service that would have probably been a 1.5 year implementation that got done in 9 days because of using innovative technologies to get that done. It's really interesting what you can do in application development and information sharing realms today that you couldn't do a year or two ago. A good case example of this is around Recreation.gov. So Recreation.gov is the place where you go and you get permits and campgrounds and those sorts of things. Lots of agencies around the table and doing that. It's actually hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue flow between citizens and the government. They did a planning exercise. They had information managers as part of this planning exercise. They were thinking about what are the core recommendations to what we want to get done. They wanted to implement Recreation.gov. They had a bunch of different spot solutions. They want to get rid of them and implement those. They wanted to resolve these redundancies of all these systems doing the same thing. And they wanted to resolve all this data duplication. We had, I don't know, 40 different websites that were storing citizen PII against just this community. And being able to get that into one was obviously going to be a more secure type of solution. The information managers did a really nice job asking these questions that are on the right. Well, how are we going to protect privacy in that environment? How long do we keep the old data? How sensitive is it that the government knows that I've been to that place? The whole kind of tracking of citizens construct and that type of thing. Who are the data stewards? Who's responsible for being able to say, well, these are the types of things that we offer at that particular location? They asked these questions. This is not what was on the mind of the architects. They were thinking about portals and boxes and things like that. Not the infrastructure guys, not the cyber guys. It was the information managers around the table who from the beginning were able to influence this, not at the end, but from the beginning were able to influence this type of discussion throughout that planning exercise. And I think that this is that collaborative planning type of construct that we're talking about. Those recommendations then go into the investment management world. This is so much of what we typically see, right? The recommendations come out of architecture, they go into investment management. If the information management community isn't part of the discussion at this point, this investment's down the track, right? As it's getting implemented, they call in the information managers, and we try to kind of go through and bail out the process, so to speak. So we have to be ahead of that visual on the right by getting involved with that collaborative planning process. I think now more than ever, the information managers are more important. And then embedded throughout governance. A lot of agencies, I see that the governance is very fragmented, and we have kind of governance for governance sake type of thing. I would point people to a group called the IT Governance Institute. It's a bunch of banks and public audit firms. Has very little to do with government and very little to do with kind of our world. But they look at information management, information governance in a very interesting way. And I always try to include this as just kind of an evangelical type of construct here. We have the IT Governance Institute has laid out 4 main things. They say your governance needs to do these things. I always like to take one of those typical governance charts with all the governance teams and the boxes and the lines and overlay this. And do we have teams doing all these types of things, or do we have teams kind of getting together? But making sure that the decisions we're making as part of planning and the things that we're implementing, making sure that those are strategically aligned to solve our mission problems, making sure that value is really getting delivered, right? Making sure that we're not taking on too much risk, and then making sure that we have some degree of performance measurement that's taking place. We should have teams doing all of this, not data teams just doing data stuff. What are the data teams doing data stuff? What are they doing as part of this, right? But as information managers, I would contend that in the information management community, when you look at the goals of governance in this way, you can see the importance of information management throughout the entire governance lifecycle, right? Strategic alignment, value delivery, risk management, performance measurement, there are information management roles throughout that lifecycle. I think oftentimes we have communities that get together. We'll have the data management group, and we'll have the whatever, architecture management group. And we build our own little silos within our worlds of groups that kind of talk about our own things to one another, instead of cross-cutting across those functions in a collaborative way to solve these types of challenges. And so I put that out there as a means of saying that I believe that the entire IT governance lifecycle and structure within any organization needs to only exist to solve these challenges. And information management is key to solving all these challenges, which by definition means information management should have a seat at the table for all governance functions. And I think that that's an important string of oversight that we are missing in a lot of agencies. And as we deliver our plans in a collaborative way, are we checking the boxes against these same intentions? Does this plan deliver, is it strategically aligned to our license plate challenge that in step one, the collaborative planning methodology, we all agreed was the challenge that we had to be able to solve? Is it delivering the value that we wanted, or does it not quite work the right way? Have we mitigated our PII risks? Have we mitigated our information sharing and citizen sensitivity types of risks and those sorts of things? And are we delivering the performance improvements that the missions said they wanted in the collaborative planning methodology in step one when we worked with them to solve that challenge? This is what the end state of planners working with other planners should be resolving. So a couple of action items for people to think about. For the information managers in the room, seek out your enterprise architects. Find those people. Don't let them hide. I work with a lot of them, so they don't always hide. But don't hide yourselves, right? Seek these people out. Find out what they're doing. Try to join them somehow in some type of collaborative endeavor, right? What are you doing, enterprise architect? Oh, you're working on, wildland fire. Okay, let me help you with that. You're working on rail safety. Let me help you with that. Let's do that together. I got a lot of stuff going on, but this is actually mission-oriented, unity of effort, and so forth. Seek out those architects, find out what they're doing, try to join them in some type of collaborative endeavor. Insist that all the active planning efforts that are going on have some type of information management principles built into that. When you're at the senior staff meeting, you're hearing about somebody who's doing something, you should be involved. By definition, everyone should be involved with everything if we're actually pulling unity of effort towards that end state. We shouldn't have someone working on the radio interoperability issue that doesn't have information management plugged in and doesn't have cyber plugged in. There's a collaboration around the key things that we should be working on. It may mean other things have to fall off the plate. But what are the 4 main challenges that we're trying to work on? And let's all be there working on those together. The third bullet's old, so I have to replace that bullet. The OMB Max website does house the collaborative planning methodology. The OMB Max website is not terribly easy to get into for folks. And so that's why it was rehoused in a .org environment. It's planthefuture.org. And then work with the governance chairs and the portfolio managers within the OCIOs. Think about that IT Governance Institute visual. They've got little downloadable 10-page PDF types of things that explain what they're thinking. But think about governance. We may not be able to take all the governance and collapse it all and rebuild it in the model of what the IT Governance Institute folks are thinking about. But I do think that as information management community, it gives us food for thought for how we should participate and engage with those folks. Because I think without information management at the table with many of these governance functions, it's going to be difficult to carry forward and bring these ideas into implementation. All right, last slide, I promise. Last thoughts. Just a recap. Ultimately, the architects are just one of many planning functions. The investment managers, the CPIC folks, are just one of many, many planning functions. The cyber folks, one of many planning functions. There are lots of planning functions that are there. The Common Approach to Enterprise Architecture document from OMB lists even more than I think what I had on that slide. Here are all these kind of planning functions. We all need to work together. unity of effort towards mission needs. That's it. We should roll out of bed and say, these are the 3 mission needs I'm working on, and then the compliance stuff. And in today's world, my position on this is that the information managers are increasingly critical to that issue. Everything is information management. As we put things in the cloud, as we put things into platform as a service environments, it becomes increasingly easy to share information. We do have advantages to technological advantages that we didn't have 5 years ago. 5 years ago, we had massive middleware implementations and ESB implementations and these sorts of things, and today it's easier, right? So the role of information sharing and information governance is more straightforward technologically, but the role of information managers in planning is where it starts, and it's critical. And that's all I have. Any questions?
Some organizations have a chief data officer, and then I also read that in commercial places, the chief data officer is going away or being combined with another position. Has anyone asked you about how that fits in with the information management person?
That's a good question. No. I mean, the chief data officer is certainly something that is in vogue and seems to be happening quite a lot in federal. There are 4 agencies that I can think of off the top of my head where we do things that have chief data officers that are there. I do think it's a recognition of the importance of information management principles, right? And the storage, sharing, protection, and accessibility of data as an asset within the organization. You could contend that the chief information officer is the chief data officer. I mean, that's there, right? You could also contend that the existing information management kind of community is the one that plays kind of that active role that's there. You know, I try to look at those types of moves, those types of management moves, and look at what the signal that's being sent. And to me, the signal that's being sent is data is a priority, sharing, data storage, data security, but data accessibility are all priority items. That how we treat information and data in the organization and use it as an asset is almost one of the most critical things that we have going on in terms of eliminating redundancies, and they want more help in that area. And so I look at that. And so I look at it as, how do we then embrace that role, right? So now we've got somebody that has a title, a chief title, that's great. And how do we feed, the things that we think we should be doing to that chief data officer? Hey, chief data officer, like, how do we get information management representation on these governance teams? How do we get information management, as part of the planning process for every major mission planning, initiative that we have going on? So I think in the information management community, when there are these chief data officers, I know there's one here, and there's, like I said, there's a handful of other agencies I can think of off the top of my head that are doing this, that we can use that as a mechanism to take some of these principles forward for us. It's very interesting, though. I mean, at the end of the day, OCIOs aren't doing that much from a mission standpoint. They're doing a lot of things. Let me just kind of make sure what I'm saying is accurate. I mean, they're doing a lot of things, but not that many different things. Our core mission is to deliver core infrastructure so that people can use phones and do their missions. Our core mission is to deliver applications that work and do the missions. And I believe our third mission in the OCIO is to deliver information between things, which may mean network interoperability, but it also might mean information management and information sharing principles and those sorts of things. I think those are our 3 missions. Our mission is not architecture. Our mission is not cyber. These are things we have to do to accomplish our missions, And so I think we do those 3 missions. And as much as we can embrace information sharing as one of those missions, we need all the horsepower we can get on that principle. It enables the other ones, I think. That's an interesting question, though. Any other questions?
Ownership of information. Seems like when things are being now congregated, coalesced in these shared drives in the cloud, the ownership of the information from the business areas ultimately do own the information. They're the ones that are responsible. That seemed like it has gotten diffused over the years, and that seems like it's a big thing. There was one of the slides in there had a responsibility, and how do you define, how is this process going to better define that ownership responsibility? And especially from a records management point of view, it's very important because, you know, we do our record schedules according to, you know, theoretically who owns the information, and we add value to that. We try to import a value to that information, a context that information with the records schedule. It's the only place probably where you can really put that information in some sort of organizational value and context. And I mean, how do you, and especially with now, we see the information's being shared so much, the stakeholders are expanding so much now. So that ownership even becomes more diffuse.
Yeah.
And so how it seems like to me the big problem is that nobody's going to do anything if they don't think they're responsible or the owners.
Yeah.
So once they, and I've dealt with this at the Patent and Trademark Office, other agencies too, once they know that they are ultimately responsible, they're the owners, then, oh, okay, then we need to do something about this. But it seems like it's in the cloud and some of the shared drives, and that those processes really are not delineated. That ownership responsibility is really not clarified.
Yeah.
And that's my big. If we can kind of like get a handle on that ownership, I think that may really help down the road to kind of leverage some of what we want to do.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's interesting. I was talking to a cabinet CIO yesterday, and he said, you know, how is it that our applications are all over the place? Like, how is it that we've lost control as a CIO of our applications? We don't even know what's going on with these applications, you know. How is it that we've lost control of that, right? And I told him, I said, you know, you never had control to begin with, and information's the same way. I would argue that it's not information that has become diffused. I would argue that information has always been diffused, and we just haven't gotten our arms around it, you know. 20 years ago, you know, 30 years ago, prior to the CIO function, the mission owners had the applications, the mission owners did the stuff. 30 years later, mission owners have the applications, mission owners do their stuff. Nothing's really changed in that regard. Our role as trying to implement architecture and planning principles against those environments, trying to secure those things that are spread around, or trying to build stewardship responsibility for all that information that's always been diffused is still a work in progress, you know. I think trying to fix it all across the board is an insurmountable challenge. But if you're over at, say, federal student aid, and you're building a new loan origination system for students that need loans, right? They're about to do that. And they have a system that's there now, it's very cumbersome, they want to retire it, they want to build a new system, public knowledge. And therein lies their opportunity to get it right, right? In that major change moment, if the architects and the planners and the information management planners are working together, it begs those questions throughout that planning life cycle of, well, this is in 4 different places. Well, when we get it into one, who owns it? And I think we can incrementally start building off those stewardship concepts if we do that in the planning function. It's a big hang-up. There was a famous HR implementation over in the DoD world about a decade ago where they spent 2 years arguing over what's an account, you know, and there was like this kind of data wars that were going on kind of in that thing. Although I would contend that it shouldn't take 2 years to argue about that, but at some point you have to have those types of discussions as part of the planning function, right? If we let that paralyze ourselves, then we'll end up with failed implementations. But I would contend that historically, as we built these applications in the mission functions to get the job done, because there was no group that was doing that for us, that diffusion was how it was invented. And it's an incremental planning construct to try to introduce stewardship as we consolidate and centralize around applications. The platform as a service revolution that seems to be taking off, it's taken off globally over the last few years. It's taking off in town now. And that is dramatically changing the way that we build applications, and it's dramatically increasing the likelihood that application development will be done centrally. And it is putting the CIO shops in a position of being able to do things that they otherwise maybe historically weren't going to be called on to do. Better, faster, cheaper, but it's almost by definition being done as essential shared service, and to the missions to be able to use these platforms. But as we have them engaging with us, because we're offering a platform as a service, as an OCIO, they can also engage with us on stewardship concepts and planning concepts and that sort of thing. So I do think that technologically, as things have come along into more platform as a service roles, NASA has a big platform as a service program, other agencies are doing big platform as a service programs as their OCIOs. As that has come along, it gives us something to offer from an application development standpoint from an OCIO to our missions, which is a big change from maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Yeah, I mean, there is that pendulum back and forth. That's true. But you know, the mainframe world was hindered on cost, heavy cost to do things. The constructs around centralization and shared cost against that kind of machinery is very similar. The cost construct that was there to build and implement those things and deploy those things, and then costs of network communications to then get that access to those things out to desktop environments drove client server, right? And then as network costs came down, data storage costs came down, and massive computing costs dramatically came down, we're back. Because it does make more sense. Computing power in a place as a commodity service, platforms wrapped around that computing power to deliver applications with cheap network infrastructure, cheap storage costs, and perhaps, you know, fractional licensing costs against that centralized infrastructure is, by definition, the most cost-effective way of delivering that application. But we had to get out of the expensive days to the less expensive days, and I think now we're in the what I would call the cheap days, where it is cheap and quick to build applications, which has benefits and could have negatives as well. It's a great point, though. It is an interesting pendulum. Any other questions? Requirements creep?
A lot of times they deploy these systems, and without the, they give you some bare bones requirements.
Yeah.
But then, you know, 3/4 of the way down the line, oh, we forgot this, we forgot that.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like that's a real problem in
Yeah.
the business area as a stakeholder, the stakeholders actually defining their requirements. And then we have to do catch up when the horses have left the barn door.
My favorite part of this collaborative planning methodology is step one. It's the part that's the least kind of technical, but it's the part that I think makes or breaks the program. The case example that I was giving around law enforcement, not the license plate issue, but the one around the fatalities of police officers. And the issue was, from the executive management and law enforcement, was we need to not have police officers getting killed. That was the edict put down. Don't have that happen. Like, do whatever you need to do to get that done. If you're thinking about step one of the methodology in the CPM, that's the edict that comes down. Executive says, I don't want that to happen anymore, fix it. Boy, we get that a lot, you know, and then it's up to what I would call the kind of mission operational management layer to interpret that guidance. Okay, that could mean a lot of things, you know. Does that mean we need to buy better weapons, vests, bulletproof cars? You know, what's the direction here? Do you want to kind of armor up our guys and gals that are in the line of fire, or is this an information management type of problem? In step one is where we take that operational management layer, you know, not the law enforcement political appointee, but that 15 in charge, who's the senior law enforcement person, the SES is senior law enforcement person, and get those folks around the table with other law enforcement people, and we have that dialogue. What does this mean? You know, what types of things are driving this challenge? And then to be able to go back and say, look, we haven't thought through, we haven't planned all this kind of thing out, but our interpretation of this is that, and the consensus within the professionals who have done this for 30 years within this agency, is that this is largely a radio interoperability challenge, which means we are not going to be buying armor, we're not going to be buying more bullets, we're not going to be doing these types of things. We're going to come back to you in a few months with a plan around radio interoperability. It is our interpretation of the mandate you have put forward as an executive. And when we get that, we get buy-in against that definition, that operational management definition, I think requirements can flow from there. I think in a lot of instances we get those executive edicts that then, maybe not as starkly as what I just kind of described in terms of, bullets versus technology, but the recreation example is a great example. We need a recreation one-stop portal. We need one place where the customers of the country, citizens of the country can come in and get recreation services from the government. That was put down by executive management staff. Okay, well, having a portal is an easy interpretation of that, but are we going to do reservations for campgrounds? Yes, maybe, no, I don't know. Are we going to do retail sales? Are we going to sell firewood or national passes to parks? There's requirements creep in a much, less stark type of way. In a step one of the CPM, they were able to go back into the executive layer and say, okay, from a recreation executive standpoint, our opinion on this is that one-stop shopping means trip planning, means get your permits, get your reservations for a campground, and it means buying passes. But it's not one-stop shopping for where do I rent a canoe, do I need some type of special training to hike that thing? Those are other types of things. We can refer, but then, other types of things. And so they were able to get executive buy-in on that and then focus the requirements around kind of functionally an interpretation of what that executive order was, which was one-stop shopping. And I think we miss that a lot. I think we get one-stop shopping, we get a lot of people in the room, people say one-stop shopping, one-stop shopping, and for 4 months, one person's got retail sales. Eventually we're going to talk about that, and for 4 months someone else is not even thinking about that, and eventually you get down the road and you've got these kind of collisions of requirements, and you get that final document and people are reading it saying this isn't what I want, this isn't right, no sign-offs, and it kind of goes away. And so I think that the CPM step one, this is why the DoD guys really like the CPM step one. They said, we don't do that, and we need to do more of that. And I think the information management role in that is big. All right.
All right, thank you.
Thanks guys. Appreciate it.